In business today, three things to know. First, Janet Yellen and the dovish Fed policy. The Fed chair vows to keep the cheap money coming because jobs and the economy aren't where they should be. The impact of Yellen's speech on the markets today. Then, religion or business or both. The Supreme Court hears the argument by Hobby Lobby that it should not be forced to provide health care it objects to on religious grounds. How might the court rule in a key test for the Affordable Care Act? And unhappy on the farm. We'll meet one American farmer who says modern farming is destroying a way of life, and you're paying the price. AriseXchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. It's Monday. Federal Reserve Chairwoman Janet Yellen made one thing clear today. Dovish policy still dominates. Speaking to community development organizers in Chicago, Yellen said the extraordinary policy of pumping cheap money into the economy is here for the long haul. She says job creation and the overall economic environment has not yet met the Fed's goals.
I believe the Fed's policies will continue to help sustain progress in the job market. But the scars from the Great Recession remain, and reaching our goals will take time.
What that means for the Fed's tapering program and any chance of raising interest rates, we'll discuss in a moment with Peter Cardillo. Clearly, Yellen is beating back the hawks who might like to see rates rise. U.S. equities, of course, liked what she had to say. Here are the final numbers for the first quarter of 2014. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 134.60, ending the day at the session's highs to 16,457. The S&P 500 up 14.72, and the NASDAQ at 41.98. For the quarter, stocks ended relatively flat, the S&P up just 1%. Taking a look at some of the top stocks we're watching today, the multi-billion-dollar legal battle between Apple and Samsung resumed in federal court. The companies are accusing each other of copying design features used in each other's smartphones and tablets. Apple has already won one major patent infringement case against Samsung, Apple closing down 12 cents to $536.74. Johnson & Johnson is selling its ortho clinical diagnostics business to the Carlyle Group for $4 billion. The global asset management group made a binding offer for the company for $4.15 billion in January. Johnson & Johnson up 79 cents to 98.23. And hundreds of workers at online retailer Amazon in Germany went on strike over pay disputes. A union spokesperson says about 500 of the 1,200 workers at Amazon's distribution center in Leipzig were expected to take part in the strike. Amazon down at $1.93 to $336.36. And commodities, gold pulling back 10 and oil down about 17 cents. So, did Yellen's comments come out of nowhere, or were we just not paying close enough attention? Peter Cardillo from Rockwell Global Capital is once again here on AriseXchange. So, Peter, any real surprise here, or did Janet Yellen just need to make it really clear about where the Fed policy is?
I think she had to make it clear, you know, when she had the press conference a couple of weeks ago. Obviously, she surprised the markets, you know, and she put a time frame, something that the Fed has never done before. And so I think she wanted to make quite clear that the Fed is not going to change monetary policy. That doesn't mean that they're going to interrupt or not continue to pull back on the stimulants. But she made it quite clear that, you know, unless the jobs market really perks up and unless we see the economy grow at, let's say, north of 4%, that most 4%. Likely, you know, a monetary policy will stay in place.
And we're not going to get growth above 3% this year, most likely, according to most economists.
I think we're looking at growth about 3.25%. Obviously, the first quarter growth is going to be very disappointing.
Some have said this is one of the most dovish speeches by the Fed in a long time. Why do you think she needed to go as far as she did today? This was a pretty aggressive position, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, it was. That sort of caught me a bit by surprise, to be honest with you. But, you know, again, I think she needed to assure the markets that the Fed is not going to disconnect from the economy. And
so looking at the economy, what bothers her the most is job growth and basically economic growth.
Yeah, but I think she's really focused on jobs growth. And of course, they both go hand in hand. And so this week we'll get the jobs numbers on Friday.
She referred to that a little bit, that might be telling. Where do you think those numbers may come in?
I'm looking for 195,000, and I believe this will be the first report in about 3 months that you might say is going to be rid of any extraordinary factors such as the weather. Of course, the question is where are the jobs going to be created, and of course, are they temporary jobs?
And do more people come back into the job market? Or
participation rate, and I think she mentioned that very clearly. She was quite, I think, specific on the fact that there has been real disappointment in the participation rate.
Yeah, she says this does not look like a normal jobs recovery for previous recessions.
Right, exactly. And so, the markets took solace to that.
So what does this mean then for the tapering program? They tapered another $10 billion. There are some economists who say they're going to get to that $40 billion level and find it really tough to draw down from there. Do you believe that's true?
No, I think they're going to continue, unless I'm wrong about the economy. And unless I'm wrong about the jobs market. Look, if you have growth of about 175 to 200,000, that will permit the Fed to continue to reduce the bond buying program. If that should sour and go under 100,000, obviously I'm going to be wrong.
And one final note, they are a little worried about deflation. You made a note in your papers about Europe and a risk of deflation there. Is that something the Fed's going to watch very carefully and see what's happening here?
Absolutely. And, I think that, unfortunately, the European Central Bank is playing with fire. I think that, unfortunately, Mr. Draghi is a puppet of the Bundesbank, and they call the shots, and the reality is that...
And you say they're paying the price for that by causing deflationary pressures.
Absolutely, and I think that, Europe could be in serious trouble if they don't do something to arrest the deflationary pressures.
Peter Cardillo, Chief Market Economist with Rockwell Global Capital. Thank you so much.
Good to be here.
Coming up, religious freedom versus reproductive rights. The Supreme Court will decide. You're watching AriseXchange. Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years in the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Welcome back to AriseXchange. On the deadline to enroll in health insurance today, required by the Affordable Care Act, the website was down for hours. But users are not the only ones complaining about the new health care law. In fact, the Supreme Court hearing arguments from the home craft chain Hobby Lobby that the law's mandate to provide contraception in particular is in violation of their First Amendment and religious freedom rights. This raises some complicated legal questions about religious liberty for individuals versus institutions. Horace Cooper is a senior fellow at the National Center for Public Policy Research. He is in Washington, D.C. Horace, welcome back to AriseXchange. First, explain to us what this lawsuit is about and Hobby Lobby's argument that they're not so much a corporation, but that they are a religious institution.
Sure. You have an issue here where the Obama administration as part of the rollout of the Affordable Care Act, issued a number of regulations about what must be provided in all of the insurance products that companies that provide insurance are going to seek out when they go into the marketplace. In this particular case, Hobby Lobby as a company said, we're providing a product. We don't want to provide with that product when we go out and ask insurance companies for the service that it includes certain kinds of contraceptive services that we consider to be abortifacients. That is, products that actually kill unborn children.
Okay, but Horace,
now, the issue that they see is that as a First Amendment entity that's protected under law, they ought to not have to comply with this regulation.
But Horace, the courts have generally held that religious freedom allows you to practice your religion. But when it comes to businesses, it doesn't allow them to engage in sort of extracurricular areas of, let's say, discrimination. So how is Hobby Lobby's argument better than the argument that says it's against our religion to hire black people?
Okay, so here's the thing. Anytime any individual or company or entity of any kind expresses its desire to be exempt from any regulation, it gets to look at and say, are there any other exemptions that are being given out? And it turns out that there's some 60% of employers that pay for policies that, in fact, are exempt from the requirement. And so the government is in a more difficult position because they're now saying you can't have one, but Christian Scientists can have one. The Amish can have one. Native Americans can have one.
Yeah, so the government sort of opened up its own Pandora's box here. Would it really be by granting these exemptions for what may look like pure play religious organizations, but there are many corporations that have a religious component.
Like the Little Sisters of the Poor. As it turns out, they're actually organized as a corporation, even though most of the people who run the organization are actual nuns, and many of the people they hire are people who share the mission of the Little Sisters of the Poor. Again, they're told they have to provide contraceptives generally, and they're balking not just at the abortifacients, but all of them because it violates their particular teachings.
So how do you Okay, so how do you think the Supreme Court is going to rule here? You know, Justice Scalia said, well, why can't we just have the government pay for that specific coverage, because he says it's not going to add up to that much money?
Well, that's a side issue, the idea of how much this actually cost. This is more about putting the government's imprimatur on the importance of reproductive freedom. I think it's more likely that this case is going to get decided fairly narrowly and may get a 7 or 8 member of the court level of support because of just the exemption issues. So many others got an exemption, and this looks like you're refusing to give it to the other.
So you think the Supreme Court will kind of punt a little bit here instead of making a sweeping ruling?
Yeah, instead of a ruling that simply says anytime anybody declares itself exempt from the rule, we're going to let them, it's going to say, if you are already allowing other exemptions, you are restricted on your ability to come up with a justification for not allowing this particular
And finally, Horace, in the last 30 seconds, if the court does rule that way, how devastating is this then to the ACA?
Actually, this isn't the most devastating part about it. I think the challenge in the D.C. Circuit Court, where the whole issue of whether or not the IRS can issue those credits in the case of those states that have not expanded Medicaid, that's going to be, or created their own exchange rather, that's going to be a far bigger attack
because
on the
that goes
ACA
right
if
to the
case
individual
succeeds.
mandate.
Absolutely.
All right, Horace, we'll have you back on to talk about that later. Horace Cooper from Washington. Thank you. Time now for our business ticker stories making headlines around the world. More difficult news for General Motors. This just in, GM recalling another 1.3 million vehicles to fix defects in the car's electric power steering. The announcement comes the day before GM's new CEO, Mary Barra, is set to testify in front of Congress. Barra will face questions about faulty ignition switches that have led to recalls of more than 2.5 million GM cars and blame them for about 13 deaths at least. Lawmakers want to know why it took GM more than a decade to address the problem. A new book warns robots are cheating investors out of billions of dollars each year, and it only takes fractions of a second. In Michael Lewis's new book, Flash Boys, tech-savvy traders have spent hundreds of millions on high-speed fiber optic computer networks that scam buyers, according to Lewis. Lewis spoke to CBS's 60 Minutes last night.
Every transaction that happens in the market is intermediated unnecessarily to no one's benefit but the scalper who's doing the job. The market itself should just be a level playing field.
Lewis alleges these system spot stock investors are about to buy and purchase them milliseconds in advance, knocking up the price for the human trader. He also claims everyone invested in the stock market is affected by this practice. London-based drug maker GlaxoSmithKline says it's investing more than $200 million in factories across sub-Saharan Africa. The company's investment follows a rise in chronic diseases among Africa's developing urban middle class. The pharmaceutical giant already has plans to expand manufacturing in Nigeria and Kenya while maintaining factories in South Africa. GlaxoSmithKline is also considering as many as 5 new factories in Rwanda, Ghana, and Ethiopia. Listen to this story about a 6th grader. A 6th grade project revealed a unique way that could save the country millions of dollars. Survi Merchandani's 2-year-old science project showed that if his school changed the font style for documents, it could save about $21,000 a year in ink costs. 14-year-old Merchandani has since been asked how much could the federal government save. His response? A lot. Merchandani found that using the skinnier, lighter Garamond font, I think it's Garamond font, instead of the standard Times New Roman font, that the federal and state governments could save $400 million a year just by changing the font. And watch out, Woody, there is a new sheriff at the box office. Disney's Frozen has knocked out Toy Story 3 as the highest grossing animated film ever. Global sales topped $1 billion yesterday and $398 million in the U.S. and Canada. Twitter, Facebook, Google, and Hewlett-Packard are just a few of the many companies that are making great strides in the field of technology. However, critics say that these companies still have a long way to go when it comes to making contributions in-house, including civil rights icon Jesse Jackson, who made headlines last week. Jackson said that technology is supposed to be about inclusion, but he said, quote, sadly, patterns of exclusion remain the order of the day. Experts say about 1 in 14 tech workers is Black or Latino, both in the Silicon Valley and nationally. Angela Benton is a recognized leader in the field and the founder of Numi, a company that helping to make sure minorities and women are also included. Angela, welcome to AriseXchange. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
So what is Jesse Jackson's point here? So what happened here is he went into the Hewlett-Packard shareholders meeting and started asking HP's CEO some pointed questions about minority hiring. What is his argument?
His argument is just generally that the tech industry isn't as diversified as it could be, which is true, but that's not to particularly point out HP. There are a lot of other companies. HP is one of them, but HP is actually one of the most diverse. They have the most diverse corporate board.
And Meg Whitman pointed that out.
Yes, yes.
That they're leading. And why do you think he then chose HP? I mean, there's an accusation that he sometimes engages in showmanship and to some extent trying to wrestle something out of these companies.
I'm not sure, what he's in it for really, but HP is one of they have a female CEO, I believe a female CFO, so I could see if he was kind of going after some of the other tech companies, but HP is not the bad guy here.
It is true that when you look at tech startups, you see a lot of white men.
Yes.
Across the board. Why do you think that is?
Well, for a couple of different reasons. For people of color, particularly minorities and women, the access to early stage capital is far and few between. They don't have access to the networks, the investors that a lot of these other CEOs have access to.
That's a really interesting point because it's the people, it's about the relationships and to some extent your other relationships and your networking, and a lot of African Americans and minorities don't have that. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only that, if you even think about from a mentorship perspective, like who you get guidance from, it all goes back to the networks. If you're not plugged into the right networks, you're less likely to succeed.
So also, is the problem here a little bit out of the education system? Because I've seen some critics of Jackson's comments here say the real problem is in the education system, that not enough minorities are being attracted into the tech space. There are not enough engineers coming out. There's not enough tech experts. Is there any truth to that?
I don't personally believe that. I'm actually kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. While getting a degree in computer science is great, that's something definitely people should strive for, it's not necessarily a key factor in determining your success, especially as an entrepreneur in the tech industry. You don't have to know how to code to be successful in the tech industry.
Let me ask you about your company, NewMe. You say that you help companies hire minorities and women. How do you do that? So a company comes to you, how do you try to hook them up with the right people?
So we don't necessarily help companies hire, but we help entrepreneurs who have ideas, particularly minorities and women, become more successful. So if you think about it in terms of a platform, we plug them into whatever they need at any given point in time. That might be access to early stage capital. It might be a mentor. It might be kind of a curriculum that we've developed.
So how hard has it been for you to find the mentors to introduce these people to?
Actually, not hard at all. We've had a lot of support from folks in the tech industry. And so to kind of double back and go back to the Jesse Jackson point, I think there is a way of getting respect and people interested in diversifying the industry in the technology field.
So what do you want to see happen here? What do you think are the goals of you and people like Jesse Jackson? What is the next step here?
The next step is really to make sure that people are prepared either to get a job in the technology industry or to raise capital from investors. And that kind of, some of it goes back to education, but some of it goes back to access to networks and, you know, access to early stage capital. That should be our goal, is to get people prepared to enter those areas.
So preparation, access, networking.
Absolutely.
Okay. Angela Benton, the founder of NewMe. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good thoughts today. Ahead, if you're going to collect welfare, maybe you shouldn't be living on your $1 million yacht. Our favorite people of the day is next here on AriseXchange.
The great thing about Arise Entertainment 360 is that we cover the 360 of entertainment, food, fashion, lifestyle, culture. We're able to cover it all. And the thing I love most about the show is we're able to do a stunning combination of high and low. So we can talk about Rihanna on the red carpet, but we can also speak about high art with people like Sanford Biggers and Hank Willis. We actually spend quality time with our guests and we really get to know them. It's really intriguing because we get a 360 look at our guests.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person or people who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a couple from Minnesota who claim to be Scottish aristocrats while at the same time, according to prosecutors, collecting more than $167,000 in food stamps, welfare, and medical assistance. And they did this while living on their $1.2 million yacht. State prosecutors say Andrea and Colin Chisholm began their scam in 2005 when they applied for public assistance. And they must have needed the money because just weeks later, they allegedly bought an 83-foot, $1 million yacht in Florida. There it is. Meantime, while they collected public benefits in Minnesota, they also collected public benefits in Florida, which presumably were delivered to their yacht. Authorities say the Chisholms hid more than $3 million that they had in various bank accounts and failed to disclose their luxury lakeside vacation home and their $30,000 Lexus, all again while collecting welfare and food stamps. From 2005 to 2012, they continued to receive public assistance, even though Colin Chisholm would later tell neighbors he was a wealthy aristocrat who made millions in the broadcasting industry. His wife is said to be a breeder of pedigree dogs. The two are now accused of fraud, but are also on the run and may have fled the country. And so for claiming to be multi-millionaire aristocrats who managed to scam 2 states out of hundreds of thousands of dollars earmarked for the truly needy, Andrea and Colin Chisholm are our favorite people of the day. Next, the people who provide our food supply are increasingly distressed, turning around the plight of American farmers. You're watching AriseXchange.
Arise serves underserved communities by bringing them news, information, sports, and entertainment from places that are becoming part of the world economy, that are becoming a part of the world voice, and decisions that are affecting things in the world that people care about. They care about the economy. They care about safety and security. And if you come to Arise and you watch our broadcast, these are the things we're going to bring to you every day, 24 hours a day.
One of the great things about Arise Entertainment 360 is we have this Arise to Your Health segment, which really focuses on the holistic approach of being healthy. So we do everything from working out to juicing to getting in shape by doing fun exercises like bouncing on a trampoline or wearing these bouncy boots on our feet when we're jumping all over the set. We've done karate, we've danced the weight off, we've done just about everything. And of course, I love when we eat on set, but we do it in a very healthy and clean way.
Farming in America is not what it used to be. Pressure to grow genetically modified organisms, or GMO, is changing the farming industry, and many farmers say their business and our food is suffering. John Kemp is a farmer and the CEO of Advancing Eco Agriculture. He joins us by the phone from Cleveland, Ohio, but because he is Amish and photographs are in violation of his religion, we are only showing you a sketch of his image. John, thank you so much for joining us here on AriseXchange. This is a really interesting topic that I don't think most Americans, when we go to our supermarkets, know about. Can you put in context a little bit for us about how the farming industry has sort of lost a lot of its people and farms over the past few years?
Certainly. There has been a growing disconnection from farmers and a growing sense of dissatisfaction. Basically what has happened, I've asked a lot of farmers the question, why do you farm? And what has attracted, farming is a very difficult profession. There's long hours, a lot of hard work, and not the highest pay. And so it's obviously not the money that attracts people to farming. What really attracts people to farming is the passion and the connection that they have to life and the living processes. So they really enjoy watching the joy of a newborn animal or watching seeds germinate in the spring. These are really what has attracted people to farming in the first place. What has evolved is that we have unconsciously adopted a model of agriculture that is directly antagonistic to these core values, a model of agriculture that is based on a warfare mentality of search and destroy, where we are constantly seeking to identify specific pests, identify specific pathogens, and then see how we can kill them using pesticides.
Well, you know, I think you're right. My mom and my grandparents were farmers upstate New York. She tells stories about waking up at 4 in the morning to go milk the cows, and she does so with pride, and it seems that we've lost part of that. And is part of this because we've industrialized the farming industry? A lot of farms, I would say a majority of them, are owned by multinational corporations.
Many of them are, yes.
And so how has that played a role then in pushing out the American farmer?
Well, I think what we have seen over the last 60-some years in agriculture is we have seen increasing centralization and ever-increasing scales of production and of operation for supposed increases in efficiency. And interestingly enough, I see gradual trends going in the opposite direction. There's a grassroots movement and even a larger movement with some of the larger corporations to begin going in the other direction, to begin decentralizing, because the challenge, of course, that you have with centralization is you have the 1,000-cow hamburger phenomena, in which you have, whenever you have challenges, food safety challenges, with the increasing centralization, you have those challenges spread out and promulgated over a much broader area.
So, John, what do you want to see done here? Because I guess the argument for GMOs is that they're giving us more food, that the nation needs more food, and that we can grow on a larger scale. But you want to roll that back.
I definitely think that farming needs to go in the other direction. If we want to have a discussion about a truly sustainable agriculture, then we need to have that sustainability locally and regionally. And to do that is going to require smaller scale farms that are able to adapt much more effectively and more quickly to the climate extremes and weather extremes that we're seeing from global climate changes and all the other things that are impacting agriculture.
But I wonder, I guess the concern is, is it really realistic when you talk about climate change, for example, for having small independent farms, when there are these big changes, do they not need the support of a larger corporation behind them so we can ensure the food supply in the U.S.?
Not necessarily, because to really produce changes in the field, you need to be nimble and need to be able to make changes very effectively and very quickly, which is something that large corporations are inherently not good at. So you need to be able to adapt very, very quickly to what is happening in the field in real time.
Let me ask you something, because you're Amish, and the Amish, of course, are farmers. Did that play a role in your advocacy here at all?
No, I don't believe so. I work with, in the consulting work that I do, I work with large corporate farms and I work with small family-scale farms all across the United States. So I see the strengths and the benefits that both have, and there certainly are some strengths and some advantages to a larger scale, and there are also some very significant disadvantages that we need to take into consideration as well.
Okay, John Kempf, I hope we could have you on again, the CEO of Advancing Eco-Agriculture. It's a fascinating topic and one that we don't really get to talk about much in this country. John, thank you so much. Coming up this week on AriseXchange, the changing face of the toy industry and why traditional toys, once made specifically for boys, are now a booming market for girls. Let's take a look at the final numbers for this quarter. A green across the board, thanks to Ms. Yellen, who had dovish words about where the Fed monetary policy is going. The market certainly liked that. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching AriseXchange. We will see you tomorrow.